Yeah, Guardiola said recently, Rafa, that he admits he was brought into Manchester City to help the club get over the line in the Champions League. It's not quite happened for him yet. But is there a sense that actually, over a much shorter period, Tuchel has been brought in to get Bayern over the line this season in this competition as well?
Yes, there would have been, of course, at the forefront of the thoughts of the Bayern board, but it's not just the Champions League. He was supposed to win all 3 titles. He's already lost one after that exit by Freiburg, so the pressure has ramped up a little bit more. Maybe not so much on him personally, but on Bayern and their season to make sure that it still has a positive outcome. Bayern, because of that dominance in the league for the last 10 years, have measured themselves in terms of what they do in the Champions League. So while getting knocked out theoretically by Manchester City wouldn't be a disgrace and wouldn't be on the same level of embarrassment, if you will, as their exit against Villarreal was last year in the quarters, it would still represent a major disappointment and effectively a big chunk of their season being over, as far as the motivation and the real excitement is concerned. So it's a big one. Bayern didn't want to play against City. They hope that Thomas Tuchel can give them maybe a slight edge, but it's no more than that. I think it still comes down to who's on the pitch. Maybe the fact that Tuchel is on the other side will lead Pep to do something strange, as he has done in the past. But I'm not sure that was really in the designs by Bayern and the board when they appointed Tuchel.
Just to get Tuchel along to make Pep overthink the quarterfinal. Yeah, I'm
Just
not
freak
quite
him
sure.
out, yeah.
It's as straightforward as that. Sam, are these the 2 strongest squads in the Champions League this year for you?
It's possible, isn't it? The thing with cities is they've always, or nearly always, got the most quality, but not the most numbers. And then, maybe not so much for this one, because when they've got Sheffield United in the FA Cup, that means that after the second leg, they can rest a few more players. Maybe there's more of a margin for error and then go again. But when you start thinking about if they were to get to the semi-finals, yeah, they've got quality. But if a couple of players are injured, it starts to look a bit thin. Obviously, Bayern are really strong. I know Real Madrid, just this weird blend of young, like really young superstars and really old geniuses. And they always seem to get it right. So yeah, between those 3, I guess. But that's part of the intrigue of this game tonight. City and Bayern. It's a wonder they haven't played more recently. It feels like it happens quite often, but it hasn't really. And the fact that Guardiola's now on in the other dugout, because I remember the games when he was Bayern manager bringing them to City. It'll be fascinating to see how they play. But I mean, I think the big question is how Tuchel's going to set them up, because if he sets them up like he did in the last 2 Premier League games when he was Chelsea manager, then it'll just be parking the bus and seeing what happens on the counter-attack. And although that's going to give City all of the ball, and although City did win those games and they look massively superior in the Champions League, when the margins are fine, if Bayern score on the break where Romelu Lukaku couldn't 18 months ago, then it makes things harder. But then I think if Bayern try and open up a bit, they could have real problems with City winning the ball back high up, getting De Bruyne flying, getting Haaland in the box, taking shots. You can see City scoring a few goals. So in terms of who's got the decisions to make, okay, Guardiola will always try something different. He'll hate that introduction he made about overthinking it. He hates that narrative. But he acknowledges that he always makes changes, but whether it's overthinking or not is only decided by us based on whether they win or whether they lose. But then Tuchel's got to decide what he wants to do. Does he want to stay kind of true to the football that Bayern fans want, or does he give them maybe a better chance and park the bus like he did at Chelsea? So he's got decisions to make as well.
I think there's a good chance that Tuchel will perhaps not park the bus, but take a slightly more reactive approach. We saw glimpses of that against Dortmund when they, by their own standards, set back quite a lot and were happy for Dortmund to play and then hit them on the break. And I think it was Marco Reus afterwards who said, well, all it did was counterattack against us, yes, but they scored 4 goals and could have had 7. And when you look at the pace that Bayern have, and when you look at the kind of games that traditionally have been problematic for Manchester City and Pep Guardiola in the Champions League, against teams with pace, against teams who are good on the break, maybe that is the better setup for a Bayern team who, of course, want to have the ball. It's in their nature to have the possession. But because their pressing game hasn't really been on point throughout, well, I think the best part of 2 years now, maybe we will see them slightly deeper and try to create that little bit of space for themselves for when they break. But as we know, a lot of teams try to do that and they just find themselves completely outplayed and not getting that control on City's midfield until it's too late, until they're already in your box. So it's going to be an interesting dilemma for Tuchel as well to work out what the best approach is.
It'll be ironic, wouldn't it? Because obviously we focus, particularly in this country, obviously about whenever a team goes out of the Champions League, but when it's City, is it overthinking or can they not handle the emotional setbacks or whatever? You know, there always has to be a big narrative about it. But Bayern Munich managers have got nowhere to hide, and if Tuchel was to adapt that approach that seems sensible, adopt that approach, that seems sensible and put more men behind the ball and play on the counter-attack. But like you say, City were able to just dominate and pick them off. That all of a sudden would be going against Bayern's principles, and he should have done this, he should have done that. And I'm sure the German press and all the former Bayern greats, some of them that are still employed by the club, will make their voices heard on that. So yeah, like I say, Pep's going to have a lot going on in his head, but Tuchel's got a lot to deal with as well. Because look, like you say, they've already gone out of the cup. If it's all hypothetical, but if they were to take that defensive approach and like really be outplayed by City in the same way that Chelsea were in those league games, then he's going to be backs against the wall straight away.
Two things on that, Raf, if I can. First of all, what would the reaction amongst the Bayern fans, but also the German media be if Bayern simply did just sit back over two legs against Manchester City and if not park the bus, at least, leave it in neutral or something? And also, like, how able do you think Tuchel is to mould this Bayern team who are so used to just blowing sides away in Germany, not exactly, having to play this defensive style? How able is Tuchel to mould them into something coherent in such a short space of time to take on, arguably the best team in Europe?
Well, it's hard to prejudge this matter because Bayern, they can change when necessary. One of the biggest results in recent history was the 4-0 win against Barcelona in the semi-final on the way up to winning the treble in 2013. And for that game, Bayern actually played on the break at home. They waited for Barcelona to commit men forward. They funneled Messi in central areas, broke really quick, and destroyed Barcelona on the break. And of course, Heinkes was hailed as a genius, and the fact that sort of he went against Bayern's principles, nobody really cared.
Yeah,
When Nico
because if they win,
if
they win, he's a genius. If they lose, they're a failure. That's how it'll be decided. Sorry, Raphael, that was my view on it, but obviously you'll know what actually happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Niko Kovac tried a similar approach against Liverpool and was hailed sort of as a master tactician when they came away with a 0-0 draw from Anfield. But in the second leg, you could see that this was just based on the flimsiest of foundations, and Bayern had nothing going forward, and they got beaten 3-1 in Munich. And it wasn't so much what the public said. It was more that internally, the players absolutely hated that approach, thinking, why is it that we're sitting back? Why are we playing on the break? We've just won, big games in recent years. We came very close to winning the Champions League under Pep, and now we're playing like a small side. So it's always a question of how you play that system, how you play that reactive style. If it really comes just down to putting long balls up front, it can look a little bit ugly and a little bit clueless. I think Tuchel's system will be different. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet, which is the fact that Eric Maxim Choupo-Moting is not playing. He didn't travel to Manchester on Monday, which means that Tuchel will have to play either a false nine or a sort of a semi-false nine in Serge Gnabry, which in itself might make him perhaps more amenable, or shall we say, might tempt him to play a more reactive style, because you have the pace of Leroy Sané, of Kingsley Coman, of Musiala on the break when there's space available. So why not make that disadvantage of not having an orthodox centre forward and make that into a benefit and do what he did at Chelsea? So we have some interesting parallels because, of course, to a large extent, his time at Chelsea was also blighted by the fact that he either didn't have a centre forward or didn't have a centre forward that worked for him. Now he'll have to do with the same problem, if you can call it that, going to that game against City.